Hi everybody, it's Brittany. Today we are going over Aphorism 2, where Hahnemann defines the perfect cure. So in the first aphorism, you may remember, Hahnemann goes over what the duty of a physician is, or what a physician's most important role is of all of the roles a physician has. In this second aphorism, he goes over the ideal therapy. The highest ideal of cure is rapid, gentle, and permanent restoration of the health, or removal and annihilation of the disease in its whole extent in the shortest, most reliable, and most harmless way, on easily comprehensible principles. So let's just rearrange the text a little bit and we'll be able to see this structure easier. The highest ideal of cure is rapid, gentle, and permanent restoration of the health on easily comprehensible principles, i.e., so he's starting to repeat himself essentially, removal and annihilation of the disease in its whole extent in the shortest, most reliable, and harmless way. So a couple points. So notice we're removing the whole disease, its entire complex, as we will talk about in later aphorisms, not just a couple symptoms. So he's already introduced that right off the bat, that we're looking at a very holistic, large view of disease. Additionally, for a cure to be perfect, it should be fast, and it should be permanent, and it should be gentle, which I think to a lot of us makes intuitive sense. I mean, obviously we don't want to cure somebody by making them sicker, and that's really not the point. And we don't want to give someone something that's going to take 2 years to work, and they're just going to suffer for 2 more years. I mean, why would you even come back to somebody who did that to you? Permanence, I think, is probably, like, again, it's a fantastic ideal, but it's, to me, probably the weakest, in the sense that permanence, how can we ever really know if something's permanent? It's always a lack of relapse. We could always wait for a relapse. I mean, something could be permanent for 30 minutes and then you have a relapse. So you really only know if it's permanent in hindsight, and really, technically, I guess you could really only know if it's permanent once the person dies, and if it never came back, then you know it really was permanent. But what if they lived another year and then it relapsed right before they died? I mean, you know, whatever. But again, as an ideal, this is exactly what we're looking for, because we don't want to give something where someone relapses all the time. We want something that's going to have a lasting cure. We don't want someone to have to take medication for a long time, ideally. So I also think gentle and speed, you know, it's also quite vague. However, in an essay he wrote called The Medicine of Experience, I get the impression that when he's talking about speed and gentleness, he's talking about faster and more gentle than nature. So, you know, if you, let's say you break your leg, and we assume that will heal in 4 weeks. If you heal in 2, that is essentially a good cure. It was faster than nature. I think it's debatable, and I'm not entirely clear if he had a strict standard or if he was just stating vague general principles. So then the idea of reliable or relying on clear principles, to a certain extent, you wouldn't be wrong for saying it doesn't really matter why someone got better if they got better, especially if they had such a great cure as one that was fast and gentle and permanent. And that is true, I think, on an individual level. Like, I think all of us, you know, if we're sick with something and we get better, to a certain extent, we don't care why. We just got better. But if you're talking about a profession, if you don't have clear principles that you can use to continually create cures, then your cures are just going to kind of be one-offs. So if you think of a gifted healer, they can do amazing things, but they are limited in that they only have one of them, right? Because if it's just sort of a divine gift, you know, whatever you would want to call it, you can't share it with a bunch of people necessarily. But if you have principles that everybody can follow, you can essentially multiply your cures. So think about Hahnemann. Hahnemann could have treated everybody in his lifetime all of his patients, and they would have gotten better if he used homeopathy, yada, yada, yada. But if he had not created clear principles that created students of homeopathy, an entire profession of homeopathy, all of the millions of cures that homeopaths have had since he died never would have happened. And that's what clear principles give us. And that's why I think it's actually a very important part of the aphorism here that we shouldn't gloss over, because our entire profession only exists because we have these clear principles, and we have so many thousands, millions of people who have gotten better because we have clear principles. So notice homeopathy has still not been mentioned, and it will not be mentioned for a while. And so he's not saying with this aphorism, I don't think, that homeopathy is the best because it meets this criteria. He does say that later, but right now I think he's more just giving us a framework with which to evaluate every type of medicine. And it does make sense if you think about this section, this first section of the Organon, as a long argument. So the first 71 aphorisms are the philosophical part, or the principles of homeopathy, and it ends with essentially what I think is essentially like a large conclusion about why homeopathy is the best medicine out there, and there is nothing that can touch it, and it's the only thing you should ever practice. But he spends these 71 aphorisms building that argument, and so I think he's starting with these principles that we can all agree on, and slowly he will build into his more specific argument about homeopathy, but we're not there yet. You could definitely argue that the first aphorism is the most important because it was put first. However, to me, it actually seems like this aphorism is almost more important to Hahnemann himself. And I say that because he repeats it everywhere. All throughout the Organon, he will make some reference to the fact that, homeopathy is best because it's fast and gentle and permanent. Or, this is the way to a fast, gentle, permanent cure. And he says it in the Medicine of Experience, which predates the Organon, and he says it there all the time, again. And so, to me, it seems like this actually is it's almost like a driving force for Hahnemann. He needs something that's fast and gentle and permanent and based on principles. None of this stupid guessing. It has to be based on principles and reliable. I could be wrong, but I find it highly suspicious that even though the first aphorism is first, the second aphorism is what he ends up repeating all over his works. So you might have been struck by Hahnemann's lovely acumen in coming up with such a lovely little ideal cure, but it was not his idea. So there is this Greek physician, or Roman, I think, Asclepiades. He lived in 124 BCE. He was famous for the saying, the duty of the physician is to heal safely, quickly, and pleasantly. So safely, quickly, pleasantly is awfully similar to rapidly, gently, and permanently. And also, just to further the craziness, so Hahnemann's got a summary where he summarizes aphorisms 1 and 2. And his summary of aphorisms 1 and 2 is the only calling of the physician is to cure rapidly, gently, and permanently. And so we have Asclepiades, the duty of the physician is to treat safely, quickly, and pleasantly. Hahnemann, the calling of the physician is to cure rapidly, gently, and permanently. I definitely would have gotten major marks off on a college paper if I had copied something so similarly. Just saying. This whole aphorism basically means that the best cure is one that happens reliably because it's based on clear principles. It happens fast, it happens gently, there's no side effects, and it's a permanent cure. Now, there are still a lot of questions left to be answered. This is only aphorism 2 after all, out of almost 300. And namely, the big question is, how in the world would we ever go about curing this way? How would we possibly live up to this ideal? And that is what is answered in the third aphorism. So until I see you guys next time, bye.